Michael Forrester knelt beside his bed, the worn springs creaking beneath his weight. Shadows stretched across the small bedroom as he folded his hands, bowing his head in the darkness. The faint glow from the hallway nightlight barely illuminated his weathered features. His voice emerged as barely a whisper, rough with emotion, that he rarely displayed in daylight hours. Lord, I know I don't talk to you as often as I should, but I need your guidance now more than ever. This isn't like anything I've faced before. No manual, no training for this kind of battlefield. He paused, gathering his thoughts, unaware of the slender silhouette lingering in the hallway. I don't know if I belong in their world. All those degrees on the wall, those power suits and corner offices. Catherine would know what to do. She always did. But I'm just a soldier. His voice cracked slightly, a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had faced gunfire without flinching. Please help me be strong for Sophie. Help me not mess this up. She believes in me so much, and I can't let her down. Not again. Sophie Forrester stood frozen in the shadows, her heart aching as she listened to her father's quiet prayers. Her strong, brave father, who had faced real battles and saved real lives, now asking for help to navigate a world of spreadsheets and board meetings. She wanted to rush in and tell him he was wrong, that he belonged anywhere he chose to be. Instead, she crept back to her room, letting him have this private moment with his faith. Through the thin walls of their apartment, a police siren wailed in the distance. Michael remained kneeling, his head bowed, his whispered words mixing with the city sounds floating up from the street below. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patches across the scattered papers on the worn table. Michael stared at his laptop screen, brows furrowed in concentration. The resume before him felt inadequate, like trying to squeeze an ocean into a glass. 20 years of military service, countless missions, lives saved and leadership tested in the harshest conditions imaginable. Yet here he was struggling to translate it all into corporate buzzwords. He rubbed his temples, feeling a familiar tension headache building. The coffee in his mug had long since gone cold, forgotten in his frustration. "Dad, you're doing that thing again," Sophie said, sliding into the chair next to him. At 15, she had an uncanny ability to read his moods. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her school uniform already on despite the early hour. You know where you overthink everything until your forehead gets all scrunchy. Michael couldn't help but smile. Is that your professional medical opinion, Dr. Forrester? Absolutely. Sophie picked up one of the draft resumes, her eyes scanning the page. I don't understand why you have to change who you are just to fit their fancy business talk. Because eliminated hostile threats doesn't exactly translate to managed workplace dynamics. Michael sighed, taking a sip of his cold coffee. The bitter taste matched his mood. Sophie put down the paper and fixed him with a serious look, the same determined expression her mother used to have. The thought brought a familiar ache to his chest. Dad, you led elite teams through impossible situations. You saved lives. You taught people to be brave when everything was scary. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. That means more than knowing how to make PowerPoint presentations. Michael squeezed back, amazed at how his daughter had grown into such a wise young woman. When did you get so smart? Must be those good genes, she grinned. Now let me help. We can make this work without turning you into something you're not. For the next hour, they worked together, Sophie helping him find ways to describe his military experience in terms that might resonate with civilian employers. She had a natural gift for words, something she'd inherited from her mother. Look here. Sophie pointed to a section about his team leadership. Instead of just listing the missions, why don't we focus on how you brought out the best in people? That's what these companies want, someone who can inspire others. Michael nodded slowly, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with coffee. You know your mom would be so proud of you right now. Sophie's eyes glistened slightly, but her smile remained bright. She'd be proud of you too, Dad. You're not giving up, even when it's hard. They worked through the morning, refining and polishing. Michael couldn't help but notice how Sophie kept sneaking glances at him, her concern barely hidden behind her encouraging words. I'll be fine, sweetheart, he assured her, recognizing her worry. It's just an interview. I know, Sophie said, though her voice wavered slightly. It's just, you deserve this, Dad. After everything you've done for our country, for other people, for me, you deserve a chance to show them who you really are. Michael stood up and pulled his daughter into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Having you believe in me is worth more than any job. Sophie hugged him back fiercely. Promise me you won't let them make you feel small. You're a hero, Dad. My hero. The next morning, Michael stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. The charcoal suit felt foreign after years of uniforms, but Sophie had insisted it brought out his eyes. The silver at his temples caught the light earned through years of service and sacrifice. Looking sharp, Dad, Sophie called from the doorway, already dressed for school. She walked over and straightened his tie, though it didn't need it. Remember what we practiced? You've got this. Michael took a deep breath, centering himself the way he used to before missions. I've got this, he repeated, more for her benefit than his own. The drive downtown was quiet, each mile bringing him closer to Horizon Global headquarters. The massive glass skyscraper rose before him, reflecting the morning sun like a beacon or a warning. As he parked in the visitor's lot, his phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Remember who you are, Captain Michael Forrester, Navy SEAL. You've faced worse than stuck-up executives. Love you, Dad. A smile tugged at his lips as he read the message. She was right, of course. He'd led men through firefights, made split-second decisions, with lives hanging in the balance, carried wounded comrades through hostile territory. He could handle an interview. Standing before the imposing building, Michael straightened his tie one final time. The revolving doors spun endlessly, people streaming in and out like a choreographed dance. He thought of Sophie's faith in him, of all the men and women he had served with, of the wife he'd lost, but whose strength he still carried. Taking a deep breath, Michael Forrester walked toward the revolving doors. In his mind, he heard Sophie's voice. You're a hero, Dad. My hero. With that thought warming his heart, he stepped forward into whatever challenges awaited him inside. The 64th floor executive suite of Horizon Global felt like another world. Michael sat perfectly straight in a leather chair worth more than his monthly rent, shoulders squared and hands resting calmly on his knees, the same posture that had carried him through countless mission briefings. But this was different. Instead of tactical maps and intelligence reports, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat separated him from Camilla Reynolds, whose manicured fingers now lifted his resume with two fingers as if it might soil her designer suit. So, Mr. Forrester, she said, her voice carrying the crisp edge of expensive education, tell me why Horizon Global should entrust its global security and operations to someone whose most recent leadership experience involves, she paused, eyebrows arching, leading military operations. Michael maintained his composure, though he felt the familiar tightening in his jaw. 22 years of military service provided me with extensive experience in risk assessment, crisis management, and team leadership, Ms. Reynolds. Camilla's laugh was soft but cutting. Mr. Forrester, this isn't the battlefield. We're talking about a Fortune 500 company with billions in assets and thousands of employees worldwide. She set his resume down and folded her hands. Our security director needs to understand corporate culture, international business protocols, stakeholder management. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp shadows across the modern art pieces that adorned her walls. Michael noticed how she kept glancing at the elegant watch on her wrist, already dismissing him. With all due respect, Michael said quietly, leadership principles remain constant whether you're protecting lives or assets. Charming philosophy, Camilla replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. But this isn't about philosophy, this is business. She stood walking to her window with the confident stride of someone used to ending conversations on her terms. Your service to our country is admirable, Mr. Forrester, but the corporate world requires a different skill set. We need someone who understands the complexities of global commerce, not, she waved a hand dismissively, combat tactics. Michael felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same stillness that preceded critical moments in the field. Ms. Reynolds, my resume doesn't list boardrooms or profit margins, but it does include something relevant to this conversation. She turned annoyed at his persistence. And what might that be? Operation Redshift Miami 2018. The change in Camilla's expression was subtle but immediate. The polished veneer cracked color draining from her face as she gripped the edge of her desk. That's classified information, she whispered. Yes, it is. Michael's voice remained steady, his eyes locked with hers. Just like the extraction of a prominent American CEO from a terrorist cell in Coral Gables. A mission that required months of planning, perfect execution, and absolute discretion. Camilla sank slowly back into her chair. Gone was the imperious CEO, replaced by someone who looked much smaller, much more human. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. You, she swallowed hard. You were there. I led the team that brought you home, Ms. Reynolds. Michael's voice softened, recognizing the shadow of old fear crossing her face. We tracked your location through 3 counties, monitored your captors for 2 weeks. When the moment came, we moved in during the darkest hour of a moonless night. Camilla's perfectly maintained composure continued to crumble, though, as long-buried memories surfaced. I never saw your faces, she whispered. They kept me blindfolded during the rescue. I only remember voices, someone carrying me, the sound of helicopters. That was protocol, Michael explained gently. Your safety was our only priority. The less you knew, the better for everyone involved. The silence that filled the office was heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the city hummed 64 stories below, but in here time seemed suspended between what was and what is. Camilla stared at Michael as if seeing him for the first time. Gone was her dismissive smirk, replaced by an expression caught between shock and something else, something that looked remarkably like shame. All this time, she said softly, I never knew who to thank. Michael remained still, his posture unchanged. The same discipline that had kept him steady during countless missions now helped him weather this moment of recognition. He watched as Camilla Reynolds, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, struggled to reconcile the man she'd been dismissing with the one who had once saved her life. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Camilla's fingers traced unconsciously along her left wrist, where Michael knew she'd once worn restraints. He'd seen the marks himself that night, though he'd never mentioned them in any report. Why didn't you say something immediately? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because that's not why I'm here, Michael replied simply. I'm here because I believe I can contribute to your company's security. My experience isn't just about combat tactics, Ms. Reynolds. It's about protecting people's assets and interests, sometimes against impossible odds. It's about making decisions under pressure and living with their consequences. Camilla stood again, but this time without her earlier arrogance. She walked to the window, her reflection fragmented in the glass. The sun illuminated her face, and for a moment, Michael caught a glimpse of the woman they'd rescued, vulnerable human stripped of pretense. She turned back to face him, and their eyes met across the expanse of her office. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared history and unspoken understanding. Camilla's throat went dry as fragments of memory crashed through the careful walls she'd built around that terrible time. You, she whispered, her voice losing its earlier sharp edge. You were there. Michael sat quietly, his posture remaining respectfully straight but non-threatening. He didn't need to say more. The truth hung heavy in the air between them. Camilla's mind raced back to those dark days. The musty blindfold, the rope burns on her wrists, the constant fear. Then the chaos of gunfire and shouting, followed by a calm, steady voice in the darkness. A voice she now recognized. I never saw your faces, she said softly, her fingers absently touching her neck, where the blindfold had been. They kept us blindfolded the whole time, but I remember your voice. You told me to stay calm, that everything would be okay. Michael nodded, once his expression gentle. That's right, ma'am. My team and I, we did what needed to be done. Camilla pushed back from her desk, standing up to pace near the window. The city sprawled below, but she wasn't seeing it. 3 days. They held me for 3 days, and then you came. She turned back to face him, her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Why didn't you say something when you first came in? It wasn't relevant to the position, Ms. Reynolds, Michael replied simply. I'm here because I want to work, not because of what happened back then. Camilla sank back into her chair, shame coloring her cheeks. And I just sat here and mocked your service record. She pressed her hands flat against the desk. Mr. Forrester, I don't even know how to begin to apologize. No apology needed, ma'am. Please, she held up a hand. Let me finish. She took a deep breath, composing herself. I was arrogant and dismissive. I looked at your resume and saw what I wanted to see, or rather, what I didn't see. Corner offices, board meetings, profit margins. She gestured to the wall of business awards behind her desk. I was measuring you against all this. Michael remained silent, his calm presence a stark contrast to Camilla's obvious distress. The job is yours, she said firmly. Of course it's yours. I can't believe I even hesitated. Ms. Reynolds, Michael's voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want the position out of guilt or obligation. Camilla straightened in her chair, some of her executive authority returning. This isn't about guilt, Mr. Forrester. This is about me recognizing that I made a serious error in judgment. You have exactly the kind of experience we need. Leadership under pressure, crisis management, strategic thinking. The fact that it was earned in combat rather than a boardroom doesn't make it any less valuable. She pulled out a leather folder from her desk drawer. In fact, it makes it more valuable. Michael considered her words carefully. My daughter, she's the reason I'm here. She deserves stability, a father with a regular job. But I need to know this is based on merit, not sympathy. Camilla's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. You have a child, Sophie, Michael said, a slight smile warming his features. She's 15. Camilla nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Then you know what it's like to want to protect someone more than anything in the world. She opened the folder, revealing employment papers. This job offer is about merit, Mr. Forrester, about recognizing real leadership when I see it. Will you accept? Michael studied her face, seeing the sincerity there. After a moment, he reached for the papers. Yes, ma'am, I will. Camilla's relief was visible as she handed him a pen. Welcome to Horizon Global, Mr. Forrester. When can you start? Monday works for me, he replied, signing his name with careful precision. After completing the paperwork, Michael stood to leave. Camilla rose as well, extending her hand. This time there was no trace of her earlier condescension. Thank you, Mr. Forrester, not just for accepting the position, but for everything. Michael shook her hand firmly. Just doing my job, ma'am. Then and now. He left Camilla's office with measured steps, waiting until he reached the privacy of the elevator before letting out a long breath. His hands were steady as he pulled out his phone and dialed Sophie's number. She answered on the first ring. Dad, how did it go? Well, he paused, still processing everything that had happened. I got the job, sweetheart. Really? That's amazing. I knew you could do it. Michael smiled, hearing the pride in his daughter's voice. It's a fresh start for us, a good one. When do you start? What's the office like? Is your boss nice? Monday, he answered, stepping out into the lobby. The office is fancy, lots of glass and chrome. And Ms. Reynolds, he thought about the strange turn the interview had taken. She's complicated, but I think it's going to be okay. Right, Sophie asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. Michael pushed through the revolving doors, emerging into the bright afternoon sunlight. Yeah, honey, I think it is. He looked up at the towering building behind him, feeling a mix of hope and uncertainty. I'll tell you all about it when I get home. The aroma of spaghetti and garlic bread filled their small apartment kitchen. Michael stood at the worn countertop, carefully dividing the simple meal onto two mismatched plates while Sophie set their modest table. The overhead light flickered slightly, another thing he needed to fix when money wasn't so tight. Dad, you have to tell me everything. Sophie bounced on her toes as she placed the paper napkins next to their plates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes bright with excitement. What was her office like? Did she have one of those fancy coffee machines? Michael couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. Actually, she did. One of those European ones that looks more like a spaceship than a coffee maker. But I didn't get to try it. Sophie slid into her chair, tucking one leg underneath her, a habit she'd had since she was little. But you got the job. That's what matters, right? No more night security shifts at the mall. No more night shifts, Michael confirmed, breaking off a piece of garlic bread. The butter melted into the warm crust, reminding him of simpler times when Catherine would bake fresh bread on Sunday afternoons. He pushed the memory aside gently. Regular hours, better pay, actual benefits. I knew you could do it. Sophie's voice carried that pure, unshakable faith that only a child could have in their parent. Those fancy executives probably never met anyone like you before. Someone who's actually done real things, helped real people. Michael paused his fork halfway to his mouth. The memory of Camilla Reynolds' face when he'd mentioned the rescue flashed through his mind. The shock, the recognition, the shame. Sometimes real things are complicated, sweetheart. Is this about what happened with Ms. Reynolds? Sophie's perception always surprised him. She might be only 15, but she could read him like a book. You got kind of quiet when you called to tell me about getting the job. Michael set his fork down, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say she and I had met before in very different circumstances. It was unexpected for both of us. Was it during one of your missions, the ones you can't talk about? He nodded slowly. Some things are better left in the phantom, but yes, our paths crossed once years ago. He took a sip of water, buying time. The important thing is, I start Monday. Regular hours mean I can be home for dinner every night. Sophie's face lit up. Really? No more microwave leftovers at midnight? Really? Michael reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And maybe we can finally fix up this place a bit. Get that new dresser you've been wanting. Dad, I don't care about furniture. Sophie's voice grew serious, her hand tightening around his. I just want you to be happy. You deserve this. After everything, after Mom. She swallowed hard. I'm just really, really proud of you. The simple sincerity in her words hit Michael like a physical force. Here was his daughter who'd lost her mother far too young, who dealt with his PTSD nightmares, who'd never complained about their tight budget or small apartment, telling him she was proud. His throat tightened. Come here, kiddo. He opened his arms and Sophie moved around the table, hugging him tight. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and that vanilla body spray she'd started wearing recently. I'm the proud one, he whispered into her hair. You've been so strong through everything. They finished dinner talking about lighter things. Sophie's upcoming history test, the neighbor's new puppy, whether they should try growing herbs on their tiny balcony. It felt normal, peaceful, like maybe things were finally turning around. After dinner, Sophie insisted on doing the dishes while Michael reviewed his new employee paperwork at the kitchen table. The corporate jargon swam before his eyes, terms of employment, non-disclosure agreements, benefit packages. It was a far cry from military contracts with their straightforward language and clear chain of command. Morning sunlight reflected off the glass tower of Horizon Global as Michael approached the building. His polished dress shoes clicked against the marble floor of the lobby. The security guard, Marcus, according to his name tag, gave him a friendly nod. Morning, Mr. Forrester. First day, right? Marcus's warm smile put Michael at ease. Got your ID badge already here. Just Michael is fine, he replied, accepting the badge. And thanks, Marcus. The elevator doors opened to the 14th floor where human resources waited to process his paperwork. A young woman with curly hair and bright eyes greeted him. Mr. Forrester, I'm Eliza from HR. She gestured to a nearby desk. Let's get you settled in. As Eliza walked him through the forms, other employees filtered past. Some offered welcoming smiles while others barely glanced his way. A group of suited men huddled by the water cooler stealing glances in his direction. Don't mind them, Eliza whispered, noticing his attention drift. Office gossip moves fast here, but you'll prove them wrong. Michael appreciated her kindness, but kept his expression neutral. He'd faced worse than workplace whispers. After HR, Eliza led him through a maze of cubicles toward the security department. Phones rang and keyboards clicked as they passed. Some employees stood to shake his hand. Welcome aboard. Nice to meet you. Looking forward to working with you. Their warmth felt genuine, though Michael caught fragments of other conversations. He's a veteran, Camilla's pet project. Probably guilt over something. The security department occupied a corner of the floor. Several screens displayed camera feeds and security metrics. A team of analysts worked at their stations, some wearing headsets. Team, this is Michael Forrester, our new security director, Eliza announced. A broad-shouldered man in his 30s stepped forward. James Wilson, assistant director. Glad to have you on board, sir. Looking forward to working together, Michael replied, shaking his hand. Something in James's eyes didn't match his welcoming words. A flicker of resentment, perhaps, or suspicion. James gave him a tour of the department, explaining their systems and protocols. Michael listened carefully, noting areas for improvement, but keeping his observations to himself. Better to learn the lay of the land first. "And this is your office," James said, opening a door. The space was modest but functional, with a desk computer and views of the city below. Michael set down his briefcase, remembering Sophie's proud smile that morning. "Staff meeting in 10 minutes, James reminded him. "Want me to show you to the conference room?" "Lead the way." They walked past more cubicles. A woman in an expensive suit deliberately stepped aside as they passed, as if avoiding contact. Two men in ties lowered their voices, watching Michael with poorly concealed disdain. The conference room was already half full when they arrived. Michael took a seat near the middle, neither hiding in the back nor dominating the front. Years of military briefings had taught him to observe before acting. Camilla Reynolds entered last, commanding attention without effort. Her eyes met Michael's briefly before she began the meeting. "Good morning, everyone. First, please welcome Michael Forrester, our new security director." A scatter of polite applause followed. Michael nodded in acknowledgement, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. The meeting covered quarterly goals, upcoming projects, and department updates. Michael noticed the subtle dynamics: who spoke with authority, who stayed silent, who rolled their eyes at others' suggestions. When the meeting ended, Camilla approached him. "How's your first morning going, Michael?" "Fine, thank you." He kept his tone professional, neither warm nor cold. "Good. We'll meet later this week to discuss your vision for the department." As people filed out, Michael heard snippets of conversation. "Can't believe she hired him. Probably can't even use Excel. Just wait till he faces the board." Later, Michael headed to the break room for coffee. The machine was complicated, nothing like his simple pot at home, but he figured it out without asking for help. Two executives in expensive suits entered, apparently not noticing him by the counter. "Did you see the new security guy?" one said, loading a pod into the machine. "Guess Camilla is doing community service now." The other laughed. "Right, I mean, what's next? Hiring a janitor as CFO. Hey, he probably knows how to shine shoes really well, military training and all that." Michael's jaw clenched, but he kept his movements steady as he stirred his coffee. His medals and scars meant nothing to them, but he'd faced worse than paper tigers in tailored suits. The executives continued their conversation, either oblivious to or uncaring of his presence. Michael remembered Sophie's words that morning: "Show them who you really are, Dad." He would not by confrontation or complaint, but through quiet competence and unwavering dignity. The same way he'd led his team through countless missions, with patience, discipline, and strength of character. Taking his coffee, Michael left the break room without acknowledging the executives. Their laughter followed him down the hall, but it didn't touch him. He had a job to do, and he would do it well. Not for them, not for Camilla, but for the same reason he'd always served: because it was right. Back in his office, Michael opened his laptop and began reviewing security protocols. The whispers and mockery would continue, but so would he. One day at a time, one task at a time, just as he taught his team in the SEALs. The morning sun caught his wedding ring as he typed. Somewhere between the glass walls and polished floors of Horizon Global, Michael Forrester, veteran widower father, began his new mission with quiet determination. He hadn't been at his desk for more than an hour when Rajiv from IT appeared in his doorway, a nervous energy about him. "Mr. Forrester, got a minute?" The young man clutched a tablet to his chest like a shield. "Of course. And it's Michael, please." Rajiv stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I wanted to talk to you about our network security protocols. I've been trying to get James to listen for months, but..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable, criticizing the assistant director. "Have a seat." Michael gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "What's your concern?" Relief washed over Rajiv's face as he sat down, immediately launching into a detailed explanation of vulnerabilities in the company's cybersecurity infrastructure. Michael listened carefully, asking precise questions that revealed his own surprising knowledge of network systems. "How did you know about packet filtering?" Rajiv asked, clearly impressed. 6-month special assignment with naval intelligence," Michael answered simply. "Some skills translate better than others." Rajiv nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "So you understand why I'm worried these vulnerabilities could leave us open to serious breaches." Michael glanced at the report on his screen, noting James Wilson's dismissal of similar concerns in previous months. "I understand completely. Leave this with me. I'll make it a priority." As Rajiv left visibly relieved, Michael turned back to his computer with renewed focus. He began drafting a comprehensive security assessment, merging Rajiv's technical concerns with his own observations about physical security weaknesses. The hours passed quickly, and before he knew it, the office had grown quiet as people left for the day. A knock at his open door pulled his attention from the screen. Camilla Reynolds stood there, her expression unreadable. "Still here. It's past 7. Michael glanced at his watch, surprised by the time. "Just finishing something up." Camilla stepped into the office, her gaze falling on his computer screen. "A security assessment already. You've been here less than 12 hours. "First impressions matter," Michael replied. "And there are some issues that shouldn't wait." Such as, Michael hesitated, weighing how direct to be on his first day. The military had taught him to speak plainly about threats, but corporate politics seemed to demand more finesse. Still, security wasn't something to be diplomatic about. Your cyber defenses have significant vulnerabilities. Your physical access controls are outdated, and your emergency response protocols haven't been updated since before the Miami headquarters expansion. He kept his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Camilla's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite the list for day one. These are just the most pressing concerns. There's more." Instead of the defensive reaction he half expected, Camilla pulled up a chair. "Show me." For the next hour, Michael walked her through his findings, explaining each vulnerability and its potential consequences in clear, non-technical language. He outlined remediation strategies, prioritized by risk level and implementation difficulty. When he finished, Camilla sat back, studying him with new eyes. "James Wilson has been our assistant security director for 3 years. He's never flagged half of these issues." Michael chose his words carefully. "Different backgrounds lead to different perspectives. My training taught me to look for certain patterns. Patterns of vulnerability." Camilla nodded slowly. "The same patterns that terrorists might exploit, or corporate espionage, or disgruntled employees. Threats come in many forms." The office had grown dark around them, the city lights now glittering beyond the window. Camilla stood smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "I want a full presentation to the executive team next week. Can you prepare something?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Michael." She paused at the door. "Thank you for taking this seriously from day one." After she left, Michael sat in the quiet of his office, a small victory warming his chest. Not acceptance yet, but acknowledgement. It was a start. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Dinner's in the microwave. Don't work too late, old man." Michael smiled, gathering his things. Some battles could wait until tomorrow. The mahogany-paneled boardroom hummed with tension as Camilla Reynolds stood at the head of the long table. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp shadows across the faces of 12 board members who sat in expensive leather chairs, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Mr. Forrester's military experience directly translates to corporate security. Camilla said, her voice firm but controlled. She gestured to the stack of papers before her. "His leadership record is impeccable." Richard Thornton, a silver-haired board member with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Camilla, this isn't the military. We need someone who understands corporate culture, not combat zones." "I disagree," Camilla replied, straightening her navy blazer. "Michael Forrester's strategic thinking and crisis management skills are exactly what we need." "He has zero corporate experience," Margaret Chen interrupted, tapping her pen against the polished table. "No MBA, no business background. How can he possibly understand the complexities of protecting a Fortune 500 company?" Camilla felt her jaw tighten. These were the same people who normally hung on her every word, but now they were challenging her judgment. Sometimes the best qualification isn't a degree. It's proven leadership under pressure. "This isn't about degrees," Thomas Reynolds cut in, his thick Boston accent filling the room. "It's about liability. What happens when the press gets wind that we hired a veteran with—" He glanced down at his notes. "Documented PTSD. That's completely out of line, Thomas." Camilla's eyes flashed. "Is it?" Margaret asked. "We have shareholders to consider. Our stock could take a hit if people think we're making emotional hiring decisions." "Emotional?" Camilla's voice rose slightly. "Michael Forrester led elite teams in high-stakes situations. He's managed complex operations with multiple moving parts. That's exactly the kind of experience we need. Camilla, Richard said softly, using the tone one might take with an unreasonable child. We understand you feel a certain obligation to Mr. Forrester given your history. The room grew still. Everyone knew about the rescue, though it was never openly discussed. This has nothing to do with that, Camilla said, her words clipped. This is about hiring the most qualified person for the job. Then let's look at the other candidates, Thomas suggested, pulling out another folder. James Morrison has 15 years of corporate security experience, MBA from Wharton, currently heading security for a tech giant in Silicon Valley. Camilla shook her head. Morrison lacks real-world crisis experience. He's never had to make split-second decisions with lives on the line. That's exactly our point, Margaret interjected. We're not in a war zone. We need someone who understands corporate politics, not battlefield tactics. Outside the boardroom, Michael stood perfectly still near the water cooler, his face impassive as the voices carried through the partially open door. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but now found himself unable to move away. Each word struck like a physical blow, though his expression never changed. Back in the boardroom, Camilla placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. I've made my decision. Michael Forrester starts today as our new security director. You may have hired him, Richard said carefully, but this board has the authority to review and overturn executive decisions that could impact company stability. Are you threatening to override me? Camilla's voice was dangerously quiet. We're suggesting you reconsider, Margaret said diplomatically. Perhaps we could create a different position for Mr. Forrester, something more suitable to his experience level. Camilla straightened up, her expression hard. I've never asked this board to trust my judgment blindly, but I'm asking now. Michael Forrester will prove himself if given the chance. And if he doesn't, Thomas asked. If he fails, then I'll take full responsibility, Camilla answered firmly. Outside, Michael's hands clenched briefly at his sides, then relaxed. He'd faced worse doubts before, in SEAL training and combat and raising Sophie alone. The words stung, but they also sparked something familiar in his gut, the quiet determination that had carried him through the darkest moments of his life. We'll give him 3 months, Richard finally conceded inside the boardroom. A probationary period, but if there are any issues, any at all, we'll need to make a change immediately. Camilla nodded curtly. Agreed. Now shall we move on to the quarterly projections? As the conversation shifted to financial matters, Michael silently moved away from the door. His footsteps were soundless on the plush carpet as he walked down the hallway, back straight, head high. The doubt and dismissal he'd heard weren't new. He'd faced similar prejudice before, but this time, instead of anger, he felt a calm resolve settle over him. They wanted proof, he would give it to them. Not through arguments or explanations, but through action, the way he'd always proven himself. One day at a time, one challenge at a time, with the same quiet competence that had kept his teams alive in the world's most dangerous places. He reached his new office, a modest space with a window overlooking the city. On his desk sat a framed photo of Sophie, her smile bright and confident. Next to it was his Navy SEAL trident, a reminder of everything he'd already overcome. The board member's words echoed in his mind. 0 corporate experience. Liability. Unsuitable. He had heard similar doubts before stepping into his first combat mission, before adopting Sophie as a single father, before every major challenge he'd faced and overcome. Michael sat down at his desk, pulled out a notepad, and began writing. He wouldn't waste energy defending himself or arguing his worth. Instead, he would do what he'd always done, let his actions speak louder than any words could. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he worked, mapping out security protocols and response strategies with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan missions. They might doubt his qualifications, but they couldn't doubt his results. Not for long. The early morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Michael Forrester stepped through the revolving doors of Horizon Global. The lobby was quiet, with only the gentle hum of the air conditioning and soft footsteps of the cleaning crew breaking the silence. He liked these peaceful moments before the rush began. They reminded him of pre-mission preparations, when clarity of mind mattered most. Michael's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he made his way to the security desk, where Marcus straightened up when he saw him approach. "Morning, Mr. Forrester." Marcus said, offering a respectful nod. Just Michael, please. How's the morning looking? Well, sir, Michael, we've got a situation brewing in receiving. 3 delivery trucks showed up at once, all claiming priority status. Loading docks in chaos. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. Show me the delivery manifests. Marcus pulled up the information on his monitor. Michael studied the screen, his mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode, just as he'd done countless times in the field when resources were limited and decisions needed to be made quickly. These 2 shipments contain temperature-sensitive materials. The third is standard office supplies. He paused, considering. Let's get eyes on the situation. Together, they walked to the loading dock, where raised voices and the rumble of idling engines filled the air. 3 frustrated drivers argued with Omar, the receiving manager, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is ridiculous, one driver shouted. I've got frozen goods here. Well, I've got sensitive lab equipment, another countered. Michael observed for a moment, taking in the layout of the dock, the position of each truck, and the growing crowd of agitated workers. He'd seen similar chaos in humanitarian missions, different scenario, same human dynamics. Omar, Michael called out quietly, but his voice carried natural authority. The arguing stopped as heads turned toward him. May I help? The receiving manager looked relieved to see him. Mr. Forrester, thank God. This is a logistics puzzle, Michael finished, his calm demeanor already affecting those around him. And every puzzle has a solution. He turned to the workers. I need 3 teams. Team 1 clear Bay 2 completely. Move everything to the temporary storage area. Team 2 prepare the cold storage facility. Team 3 stage the office supplies in the holding area. His clear, precise instructions had an immediate effect. Workers who had been standing around uncertain began moving with purpose. Sir, one of the younger workers raised his hand. The cold storage facility is usually locked until 8. Michael nodded. Call Angela in facilities. Her number is on the emergency contact list. Tell her Michael Forrester needs access for priority deliveries. While the worker made the call, Michael turned to the truck drivers. Gentlemen, we'll have you unloaded in the next 30 minutes. The frozen goods will go first, followed by the lab equipment, standard supplies last. He looked each man in the eye. Will that work for everyone? The drivers who moments ago had been ready to come to blows found themselves nodding in agreement. Michael stayed quietly orchestrating the operation. He helped move boxes when needed, offered suggestions when workers struggled with heavy equipment, and kept everything flowing smoothly. His military experience had taught him that good leadership wasn't about shouting orders. It was about creating order from chaos through clear communication and leading by example. Up in her office, Camilla Reynolds stood at her window, coffee cup in hand, watching the scene unfold below. She'd arrived early to prepare for a conference call, only to witness Michael's handling of the situation. There was something fascinating about his approach. No grandstanding, no power plays, just quiet efficiency and natural leadership that brought out the best in those around him. She observed as workers who had been whispering about the charity hire just yesterday now gathered around Michael, listening intently as he explained a more efficient way to organize the loading dock. His suggestions were practical, drawn from his military experience in logistics, and adapted perfectly for civilian use. When the last truck pulled away well ahead of schedule, Camilla noticed something remarkable. The workers weren't rushing to disperse as they usually did after a crisis. Instead, they were talking, smiling, showing a camaraderie that had been missing from the loading dock for years. Michael stood slightly apart, making notes on a clipboard. He wasn't seeking attention or praise for solving the problem. He simply did what needed to be done, then stepped back to let others take credit for the successful resolution. Camilla found herself remembering her own rescue years ago. How the SEAL team had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, resolved the situation with precise efficiency, then disappeared just as quietly. She was beginning to understand that Michael Forrester's military experience wasn't a liability to be hidden or apologized for. It was an asset that brought a unique perspective to civilian challenges. As she watched, Michael shook hands with Omar and headed back inside. The receiving manager was smiling for the first time in weeks, his earlier frustration completely forgotten. Several workers called out goodbyes to Michael, their respect evident in their tone. Camilla sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Michael's approach was unconventional by corporate standards. No meetings, no memos, no formal procedures being followed. Yet in less than an hour, he had solved a problem that had been plaguing the loading dock for months, while simultaneously earning the genuine respect of the workers. It was a leadership style she'd never encountered in the corporate world, where authority was usually enforced through titles and org charts. Michael led by example with a quiet competence that made people want to follow rather than feel compelled to obey. Through the tinted glass, Camilla watched as Michael disappeared into the building, leaving behind a smoothly running operation and a group of employees who suddenly seemed more like a team than just coworkers. She set her coffee cup down, a thoughtful expression on her face, as she considered this different kind of leadership that had just played out before her. The security department fell silent as Michael entered later that morning, all eyes turning to him with a new kind of attention. Word about the loading dock incident had spread through the building with remarkable speed. James Wilson's smile tightened as he approached Michael. Quite the morning hero, I hear, taking charge of receiving operations now. That's not exactly security's domain. Michael met his gaze steadily. Security is about maintaining smooth operations throughout the facility. Disruptions anywhere create vulnerabilities everywhere. Several team members nodded in agreement, but James's expression soured further. We have protocols here, Forrester. Chain of command. You can't just waltz in and start giving orders to other departments. I didn't give orders. I offered solutions. Michael kept his voice level, aware of the audience watching their exchange. If you'd prefer I ignore problems outside our immediate scope, I can adjust my approach. The challenge hung in the air between them. James clearly wanted to press the issue, but knew he'd already lost the room's sympathy. He retreated with a curt nod, disappearing into his office and closing the door with more force than necessary. Eliza from HR appeared at Michael's side as the team returned to their work. You've made quite the impression. Omar from receiving practically sang your praises to anyone who would listen. I just helped solve a logistical problem. That's not how things usually work around here. Eliza lowered her voice. Most executives would have called a meeting to discuss forming a committee to evaluate the situation. By then, the ice cream would have melted and the drivers would have quit. Michael suppressed a smile. Military habit. See problem, fix problem. Well, it's refreshing, but... Eliza hesitated. You might want to tread carefully with James. He was next in line for your position before Camilla hired you externally. His pride is wounded. Noted. Thank you for the heads up. As Eliza walked away, Michael considered the new dimension to his challenge. James Wilson wasn't just a colleague, he was a potential adversary who felt threatened. In the field, knowing who might undermine a mission was as important as identifying the enemy. Michael made a mental note to keep a closer eye on James's activities. He spent the rest of the morning reviewing security reports and familiarizing himself with the company's emergency protocols. What he found troubled him. The procedures were outdated, overly complicated, and in some cases contradictory. Many appeared to have been copied from standard templates without being adapted to Horizon's specific needs. Michael began drafting revisions, simplifying language, and creating clear decision trees for various scenarios. He'd learned in combat that complicated plans fall apart under pressure. The best protocols were those that anyone could follow in a crisis without second-guessing themselves. The cafeteria hummed with lunchtime conversation as Michael found an empty table near the window. He'd barely taken his first bite when Rajiv from IT slid into the seat across from him, his enthusiasm barely contained. I heard about the loading dock situation. Classic rapid response deployment. Omar said you organized everything like some kind of logistics ninja. Rajiv's admiration was obvious, his eyes wide behind thick-framed glasses. Just applied some basic principles. Nothing special. Michael took another bite of his sandwich, uncomfortable with the attention. Nothing special. The last time we had a delivery backup, it took 3 days and 2 VP interventions to sort out. Rajiv leaned forward conspiratorially. Listen, I've been thinking about your network security concerns. I've started mapping out vulnerable nodes like you suggested. It's worse than we thought. Michael nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. Document everything. We'll need solid evidence when we present our findings. That's just it. I'm not sure James will let this get to a presentation stage. He's already shut down 3 of my previous security proposals. This time will be different. Rajiv seemed about to say more when a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to find two executives standing there, the same men Michael had overheard in the break room his first day. Forrester, the taller one, said, his tone dripping with false cordiality. Brandon Mercer, VP of Operations. This is Trevor Harding, Chief Financial Officer. Mind if we join you? Without waiting for a response, they sat down effectively, dismissing Rajiv, who mumbled an excuse and retreated. Michael kept his face impassive, sizing up the newcomers with a practiced eye. Power moves and intimidation tactics were universal, whether in boardrooms or battlefields. We heard about your little adventure in receiving this morning, Brandon said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Quite the hands-on approach. Problem solving is part of the job. Michael took another bite of his sandwich, refusing to be rushed. The thing is, Trevor interjected. We have procedures here, chains of command. It creates confusion when people bypass established channels. Michael set down his sandwich. With respect, when a situation requires immediate action, waiting for procedural approval creates unnecessary risk. In the military, we call that paralysis by analysis. It gets people killed. Brandon's smile hardened. This isn't a war zone, Forrester. It's a Fortune 500 company. Different context, same principle. Inefficiency costs money instead of lives, but the loss is still real. The two executives exchanged glances, clearly not accustomed to being challenged. Look, Trevor said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but you might want to consider how things are done around here. Camilla may have hired you, but your success depends on fitting into our culture. Michael met their gaze steadily. I was hired to improve security, not to maintain the status quo. Sometimes that requires challenging established patterns. Bold words for someone still on probation. Brandon said, the threat barely veiled. I've never been afraid of a challenge. Michael's voice remained calm, but his eyes held the unwavering intensity that had made hardened fighters follow him into combat. If you'll excuse me, I have a security review to finish. He gathered his half-eaten lunch and stood nodding politely before walking away. Behind him, he could hear the executives' muted conversation, their tone suggesting he'd made new enemies. Michael didn't care. He hadn't survived 2 decades in special forces by worrying about who liked him. Results were what mattered, and results were what he intended to deliver. Back in his office, Michael found an unexpected visitor waiting. Camilla Reynolds sat in the chair opposite his desk, reviewing documents from a leather portfolio. She looked up as he entered. Interesting lunch conversation, she observed. Mercer and Harding rarely mingle with the common folk. Michael set down his tray. They wanted to discuss corporate culture and established protocols. I bet they did. A hint of amusement played at the corners of Camilla's mouth. Those two represent the old guard here, resistant to change, protective of their fiefdoms. And where do you stand on change, Miss Reynolds? Camilla closed her portfolio, considering the question. I believe in necessary evolution. Horizon didn't become an industry leader by clinging to outdated methods. She fixed him with a penetrating look. But change needs to be strategic, not chaotic. Which brings you to my office. Michael sat down, meeting her gaze evenly. I received complaints about your handling of the receiving dock situation. Simultaneously, I received praise from the ground crew and warehouse staff who said you resolved in 30 minutes what normally takes days. Camilla leaned forward slightly. So I'm curious, what exactly is your approach here? Michael considered his words carefully. In the SEALs, we had a principle: simplify the complex, not complicate the simple. Most problems have straightforward solutions buried under layers of procedure and politics. And you intend to cut through those layers. Where necessary, yes. My job is to identify and mitigate security risks. Sometimes that means addressing systemic inefficiencies that create vulnerabilities. Camilla tapped her fingers thoughtfully against the leather portfolio. You're making waves, Michael. 3 days in, and you've already disrupted established hierarchies, challenged executive authority, and bypassed standard protocols. Is that a problem? That depends on your results. She stood straightening her impeccable suit. The board has concerns about your methods. I've bought you time, but I need tangible improvements to justify their patience. How much time? 3 months. Show me measurable security enhancements within 90 days, and I'll make sure the board backs off permanently. Michael nodded, accepting the challenge. You'll have your results. I expect nothing less. Camilla moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Michael Brandon Mercer's department consistently runs 20% over budget with 15% under performance. If you find inefficiencies there, document them thoroughly. The message was clear. Camilla wasn't opposed to Michael shaking up the status quo, provided he could deliver results that justified the disruption. It was a fair arrangement and more support than he'd expected from corporate leadership. As Camilla left, Michael turned to his computer and began compiling his observations and recommendations into a formal security improvement plan. If he had 90 days to prove himself, he wouldn't waste a single one. At Mel's Corner Diner, the afternoon sun streamed through smudged windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn red vinyl booths. Michael sat across from his daughter Sophie, watching her push a French fry around her plate. The familiar smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the air. But today, their usual comfort spot felt heavy with unspoken words. "Dad." Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. She kept her eyes fixed on the half-eaten burger in front of her. Some kids at school were saying stuff today. Michael's heart tightened, but he kept his expression calm. "What kind of stuff, sweetheart?" Sophie's shoulders hunched forward. "They said you only got the job because Mrs. Reynolds felt sorry for you. That you're not," she swallowed hard, "that you're not qualified enough to work there." Michael reached across the table and gently took his daughter's hand. Her small fingers were cold despite the warm diner air. "Hey, look at me for a second." When Sophie raised her eyes, they were glossy with unshed tears. The sight made Michael's chest ache, but he smiled softly at her. "Let me tell you about something that happened during my SEAL training," he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "There was this obstacle course we had to complete. Most guys would try to muscle through it, showing off how strong they were. But there was this one instructor, we called him Chief Morris, who taught me something I've never forgotten." Sophie straightened slightly, her food forgotten. She'd always loved her father's Navy stories, especially the ones with life lessons woven into them. Chief Morris said, "Forrester, sometimes the strongest person isn't the one making the most noise. Sometimes it's the quiet one who keeps going when everyone else has given up." Michael's voice grew softer, more reflective. "I wasn't the biggest guy in my class or the fastest, but I learned that true strength isn't about what other people see on the surface." The waitress stopped by to refill Michael's coffee cup. Sophie waited until she left before asking, "But how do you do it, Dad? How do you go to work every day when people are so mean?" Michael stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "You remember when we moved here after Mom passed? How hard those first few months were?" Sophie nodded, her expression softening at the memory. "But we got through it together, didn't we?" "One day at a time." Michael leaned forward. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up, do our best, and let our actions speak for themselves. Like when you helped me learn to swim." Sophie's lips curved into a small smile. "I was so scared, but you said fear only wins if we let it." "Exactly." Michael's eyes crinkled at the corners. "And remember what happened? I became the fastest swimmer in my class," Sophie said, sitting up straighter, "because you didn't give up. You kept showing up at the pool even when you were scared." Michael took a sip of his coffee. "That's what I'm doing now at Horizon Global. People can say what they want, but at the end of the day, it's not their opinions that matter." Sophie tilted her head. "What matters then? What matters is knowing who we are and what we stand for." Michael's voice grew firm but gentle. "In the SEALs, we had a saying, 'The only easy day was yesterday.' It means that challenges make us stronger even when they're hard, especially when they're hard. Like that time your team had to carry those heavy logs during training," Sophie asked, remembering another of her father's stories. "Just like that. We succeeded because we worked together, trusted each other, and never gave up." Michael smiled. "And you know what? Those were the lessons that really mattered, not how much we could lift or how fast we could run." Sophie pushed her plate aside, sitting up straighter. "So when kids at school say mean things, we remember that their words can only hurt us if we let them. We stand tall, keep our heads high, and let our actions speak louder than their words. Like you do at work." Michael nodded. "Every day I focus on doing my job the best I can. That's all any of us can do. Our best." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing her father's words. Then she stood up from her side of the booth and walked around to his side without saying anything. She wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, burying her face in his shoulder. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "I think I understand now." Michael held his daughter close, feeling the familiar surge of love and protection that had guided him through every challenge since becoming a single father. When Sophie pulled back, her eyes were clear and determined, no longer clouded with doubt. "Ready to head home?" Michael asked, reaching for his wallet. Sophie stood tall, squaring her shoulders in a way that reminded Michael so much of her mother. "Ready?" she said firmly, and wrapped him in another hug before they prepared to leave the diner. Over the next few weeks, Michael implemented a methodical overhaul of Horizon Global's security systems. He started with the basics, updating access protocols, reinforcing vulnerable entry points, and establishing clear emergency response procedures. Each morning he arrived before dawn, using the quiet hours to test security measures without disrupting normal operations. Each evening he documented his findings and planned the next day's improvements. James Wilson maintained a veneer of cooperation, but his resistance was evident in subtle ways: delayed responses to requests, forgotten meetings, and barely concealed smirks when executives questioned Michael's methods. Rather than confront James directly, Michael simply worked around him, building relationships with key personnel in every department and demonstrating the value of his security enhancements through measurable results. The loading dock now operated with military precision. The IT department, under Rajiv's enthusiastic guidance, had patched critical vulnerabilities in the company's network. Even the executive floor had embraced Michael's streamlined visitor protocols after he demonstrated how easily the previous system could be circumvented. Small successes began to accumulate. Security incidents decreased. Response times improved. Employees who had once viewed security measures as inconvenient impositions now understood their purpose and importance. Michael's quiet competence and respectful approach earned him allies throughout the company, from the maintenance staff to mid-level managers. But not everyone was pleased with these changes. Brandon Mercer and Trevor Harding continued their campaign of subtle undermining, questioning Michael's decisions in meetings and spreading doubts about his qualifications. They found a willing ally in James, whose resentment had hardened into active opposition. Michael observed their coalition forming, but focused on his work rather than office politics. He'd faced far more dangerous adversaries than corporate executives with bruised egos. Still, he recognized the potential threat they posed to his position and, by extension, to the security improvements he was implementing. One evening, as most employees had gone home, Michael noticed James lingering in the security office, accessing files on the main computer. From the doorway, Michael watched as James downloaded something onto a flash drive, glancing furtively over his shoulder. When James finally left, Michael checked the system logs and discovered someone had accessed his personnel files, specifically his military service records and medical history. The invasion of privacy was concerning, but not surprising. Michael had anticipated that someone would eventually dig into his background, looking for ammunition. His PTSD diagnosis, though well managed for years, could be weaponized by someone determined to paint him as unstable or unreliable. Rather than confront James directly, Michael decided to accelerate his security improvement timeline. If his position might be in jeopardy, he needed to establish his value beyond question before his opponents could undermine him. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Camilla called an all-hands meeting to announce a major client presentation at Horizon headquarters. Government officials and high-level executives from multiple Fortune 500 companies would be attending, a perfect scenario to demonstrate Michael's enhanced security protocols. "This is a zero-failure event," Camilla emphasized in the planning meeting. "These clients represent over $2 billion in potential contracts. Everything must be flawless." Michael submitted a comprehensive security plan that integrated physical security, cybersecurity, and emergency response protocols. His proposal was detailed, innovative, and thorough, drawing on his experience protecting high-value assets in hostile territories. James immediately objected. "This is excessive and will disrupt the presentation flow. Our standard protocols are sufficient." "Our standard protocols have significant gaps," Michael countered calmly. "This event presents multiple high-value targets in a publicly announced location, a textbook high-risk scenario." Brandon Mercer sided with James. "Forrester's plan requires additional personnel and resources we haven't budgeted for. It's overkill. Not if you consider the potential cost of a security breach." Michael remained composed, presenting facts rather than engaging in the politics of the situation. The reputational damage alone would far exceed the preventative investment. The debate continued until Camilla raised her hand for silence. "We'll implement Michael's plan." Her tone left no room for argument. "Brandon adjusts the budget accordingly. James work with Michael on execution. This isn't negotiable." The room fell silent, the power dynamics shifting visibly. James's face flushed with barely contained anger, while Brandon's expression hardened into cold hostility. Michael acknowledged Camilla's decision with a simple nod, neither gloating nor seeking validation. As the meeting dispersed, Michael felt the weight of the responsibility he'd just been given. Camilla had publicly staked her authority on his judgment, a significant vote of confidence, but also an enormous risk. If anything went wrong during this event, his opponents would have all the ammunition they needed to remove him. The stakes had just been raised considerably. Michael would need to ensure his security plan was executed flawlessly, despite knowing that James and his allies might actively work to undermine it. In the days leading up to the client presentation, Michael worked tirelessly personally inspecting every aspect of the security preparations. He trained staff on emergency procedures, verified credentials for all external vendors, and implemented discreet but effective screening measures for all attendees. James maintained minimal cooperation, doing exactly what was required but nothing more. His resentment had hardened into silent opposition, his eyes following Michael with undisguised animosity. On several occasions, Michael discovered last-minute changes to security assignments or equipment placements, small sabotages that could have created vulnerabilities if not caught in time. Each time, Michael quietly corrected the issues without confrontation or accusation. He'd long ago learned that engaging with saboteurs only elevated their status and distracted from the mission. Instead, he focused on building redundancies into his planned backup systems and contingencies that would ensure security even if some elements were compromised. The night before the presentation, Michael stayed late conducting a final walkthrough of the entire facility. The corporate headquarters had been transformed into a showcase of Horizon Global's capabilities, with product displays, multimedia presentations, and catering stations positioned throughout the main conference levels. As he checked a service corridor on the 32nd floor, Michael noticed a maintenance worker he didn't recognize attempting to access a restricted utility room. When questioned, the man produced what appeared to be valid credentials, but something about his demeanor triggered Michael's finely tuned threat assessment instincts. "I'll need to verify this authorization," Michael said, reaching for his radio. The man's expression changed instantly, desperation replacing the previous facade of compliance. He shoved Michael hard against the wall and bolted down the corridor. Michael recovered quickly, pursuing the intruder with the focused intensity of a predator. The chase ended at a fire exit where Michael tackled the man just as he was about to escape. They crashed through the door onto the fire stairs, tumbling down half a flight before Michael subdued the intruder with practiced efficiency. A quick search revealed sophisticated electronic equipment and building schematics, the tools of corporate espionage, not maintenance. Security personnel responded to Michael's radio call, taking the would-be spy into custody. A subsequent sweep of the building revealed hidden listening devices in 2 conference rooms, where the most sensitive client discussions would take place the following day. Had Michael not interrupted the operation, competitors would have gained access to proprietary information worth millions. By morning, the incident had been contained with minimal disruption. The spy was in police custody, the listening devices removed, and security protocols adjusted to prevent similar infiltration attempts. When Camilla arrived at 6 a.m. for final preparations, Michael briefed her privately on the situation. Industrial espionage. Camilla's expression darkened as she reviewed the police report. Who was he working for? That's still under investigation, but preliminary evidence points to Axiom Technologies. Michael kept his tone neutral, focusing on facts rather than speculation. They've been aggressively pursuing government contracts in our sector. The same contracts we're presenting for today. Camilla shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. If they had succeeded, but they didn't, Michael reminded her. The system worked. We contained the threat. Camilla studied him for a moment, noting the bruise forming on his temple from the confrontation, but saying nothing about it. Your security enhancements prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach. The board will need to hear about this after today's presentation. I'd prefer to keep a low profile on this. Michael had never sought recognition for doing his job. The important thing is that the event proceeds safely. Your modesty is admirable, but results deserve acknowledgement. Camilla's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. For now, let's focus on ensuring today goes perfectly. The client presentation proceeded without further incident. Government officials and corporate executives moved through Horizon Global's headquarters, engaged in demonstrations and discussions that would shape future partnerships. Security was tight but unobtrusive, exactly as Michael had planned. Few attendees realized the comprehensive protective measures surrounding them, which was precisely the point. Michael observed from the background, constantly monitoring the security operation through discreet communications with his team. James Wilson was conspicuously performing his duties with exaggerated thoroughness, aware that his previous opposition to the enhanced security measures had been proven dangerously misguided by the previous night's events. By late afternoon, as the event wound to a successful close, the mood among Horizon's executives was jubilant. Early feedback indicated strong interest from multiple potential clients, with several suggesting immediate follow-up discussions. Camilla moved through the crowd with practiced grace, but Michael noticed her eyes occasionally scanning the room, assessing security, just as he did a habit likely formed during her captivity years ago. As the last guest departed, Camilla approached Michael where he stood monitoring the exit procedures. The Pentagon representatives were particularly impressed with our security protocols, she informed him. Apparently, they have had concerns about industrial espionage at similar events with other contractors. Your measures gave them confidence in our ability to protect sensitive information. Michael nodded, accepting the information without pride or self-congratulation. That was the intention. You realize you've just helped secure approximately $800 million in potential government contracts? Camilla's voice held a hint of amused disbelief at his understated response. Most people would be taking a victory lap right now. The job's not finished until everyone's safely out and the building is secured. Michael replied, the military precision in his thinking evident. Celebrations can wait. Camilla studied him with newfound respect. You truly aren't motivated by recognition or advancement, are you? This isn't a career step for you, it's a mission. Security isn't about accolades, it's about results. Michael checked his watch, noting the time. If you'll excuse me, I need to oversee the final sweep. As he moved away, Camilla called after him. The board meeting is tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I expect you to be there for a full briefing on last night's incident and today's success. Michael acknowledged the instruction with a nod, already focusing on the next task. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but his instincts told him this was just the beginning. If Horizon Global had become a target for corporate espionage, the challenges to their security were likely to increase, not diminish. He would need to maintain vigilance and prepare his team for more sophisticated attacks in the future. The thought didn't trouble him. After all, anticipating threats and developing countermeasures had been his life's work long before he entered the corporate world. The ordinary Tuesday morning at Horizon Global shattered when piercing alarms cut through the usual office chatter. Red emergency lights flashed across the pristine walls of the 40-story building, casting an eerie glow over suddenly panicked faces. Michael's head snapped up from his desk, his military instincts kicking in instantly, while others froze his mind, cleared with familiar focus. The chaos around him slowed to a manageable rhythm as years of training took over. Everyone remain calm, he commanded, his voice carrying across the floor with quiet authority. The scattered employees turned toward him, finding stability in his steady presence. This is not a drill. We're going to evacuate in an orderly fashion. Through the growing commotion, its security alerts flashed across computer screens. Someone had breached the building's main server room. Michael's radio crackled with scattered reports of unauthorized access on multiple floors. Camilla burst from her office, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of worry. Michael, we have sensitive data. I know, he replied calmly, already moving. Get your people out first. I'll handle the rest. He keyed his radio, speaking in clear, measured tones. Security team, implement Protocol Delta. I want guards at all stairwell exits and elevator banks. Engineering, lock down the server rooms on floors 12 through 15. The security guards, usually dismissive of the military guy, responded immediately to the natural authority in his voice. Through his earpiece, Michael heard confirmations as his orders were carried out. Turning to the growing crowd of nervous employees, he raised his voice. Listen up. We're evacuating in groups of 20. Follow your floor wardens to the nearest stairwell. Stay together, no elevators. If you have visitors, keep them with you. A young intern started to cry, clutching her purse. Michael placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You're going to be fine. Eliza here will walk with you. He nodded to a more experienced employee who stepped forward to help. As groups began moving toward the stairs, Michael's trained eye caught movement on the security cameras. Three figures in maintenance uniforms were moving against the flow of evacuation, heading up instead of down. Camilla, he called, get down to the lobby with the next group. I need you visible to keep people calm. She started to protest but saw something in his expression that made her pause. Be careful, she said instead, surprising them both with her concern. Michael moved swiftly through the emptying floors, coordinating with his team through short radio bursts. Teams 2 and 3 converge on floor 14, possible hostiles in maintenance gear moving up. Marcus locked down all access points to the executive floors. The stairwells filled with the orderly sound of hundreds of feet descending. Michael's training had kicked in automatically: protect the civilians first, then secure the asset. In this case, the company's servers held millions in intellectual property and client data. He caught up to the intruders on the 15th floor. They wore authentic-looking uniforms, but Michael spotted the inconsistencies immediately: wrong shoes. No ID badges, movements too purposeful for regular maintenance workers. Stop right there, he commanded, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. The men spun, reaching for concealed weapons. Michael moved before they could draw his body, remembering countless close-quarter combat drills. He struck the first man's wrist, sending a concealed taser clattering across the floor. The second attacker rushed him, but Michael sidestepped, using the man's momentum to slam him into the wall. The third intruder pulled back, reaching for something in his pocket. Michael's hand shot out, gripping the man's arm with iron strength. I wouldn't, he said quietly. Security teams pounded up the stairs, surrounding the subdued intruders. Michael supervised as they were cuffed and searched, finding sophisticated hacking equipment and building schematics. Clear the building floor by floor, he ordered his teams. I want every room checked before we give the all clear. Down in the lobby, Camilla watched the security feeds with growing amazement as Michael methodically contained the threat. His movements were precise, his commands clear and confident. This was not the same man the board had dismissed as unqualified. After 30 tense minutes, Michael's voice came over the building's PA system. The building is secure. All threats have been contained. Please return to your floors in an orderly fashion. Security teams will verify IDs at all entrances. As employees filed back in, the mood had shifted dramatically. People pointed at the security cameras, describing how they had watched Michael take down the intruders. Others shared stories of how his calm leadership had prevented panic during the evacuation. Camilla stood in the lobby watching as Michael descended the stairs with his security team, the handcuffed intruders between them. Local police were already waiting to take custody. Employees gathered in the atrium broke into spontaneous applause. Michael looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he couldn't avoid the waves of gratitude. A young woman from accounting stepped forward to thank him personally, tears in her eyes, as she described how his presence had helped her handle her anxiety during the evacuation. Just doing my job, he said quietly. But the words carried weight now. This was exactly the part he had been trained to do: protect people, maintain order, lead under pressure. Camilla approached him as the police led the suspects away. She had witnessed the entire incident from the security feeds, seeing how his military experience had transformed into exactly what the company needed. I don't know what we would have done without you today, she said, her usual corporate polish giving way to genuine respect. Michael met her gaze steadily. You hired me to protect this company and its people. That's what I did. More employees gathered around, sharing their relief and gratitude. The same executives who had whispered about his qualifications now stood back, reassessing their judgments. Michael had proved himself not through boardroom politics or corporate credentials, but through decisive action and unwavering leadership. As the crowd dispersed and normal operations resumed, Camilla noticed how Michael deflected praise and instead checked on his security teams, ensuring they were properly rotated for breaks after the crisis. She watched him move through the lobby with quiet confidence and felt something shift in her perspective. This was a different kind of leadership, one built on service competence and genuine care for others. The morning's events had demonstrated something no resume could capture. The true measure of a person revealed itself not in titles or credentials, but in moments of crisis when others looked for someone to lead the way. The first rays of morning light had barely crept through the kitchen blinds when Michael's phone began to vibrate insistently. Notification after notification lit up the screen, each one tightening the knot in his stomach. Setting down his coffee mug, he unlocked the phone to find a headline that made his blood run cold. Unstable veteran security chief at Horizon Global hidden past of PTSD in tragedy raises concerns. His hand stilled as he scrolled through the article. Personal details about his military service, the therapy sessions after his combat tours, and most devastatingly intimate details about Catherine's final days information he'd shared only during confidential HR interviews. The writer had crafted a carefully manipulated narrative, the battle-scarred warrior too broken for civilian life, the widower haunted by demons. Every achievement at Horizon twisted into a potential liability. The sound of soft footsteps on the hallway carpet pulled his attention from the screen. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, already in her school uniform backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Dad." Her voice faltered as she caught sight of his expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael quickly locked his phone screen. "Nothing important. Ready for that calculus test today?" But Sophie was already reaching for her own phone, her face falling as notifications began appearing. Friends sharing the article, tagging her, sending messages with questions. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, her expression shifting from confusion to hurt to anger. "Dad, how could they? This isn't right," her voice cracked. "They're saying terrible things about you, about Mom." Michael moved to his daughter's side, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Some people," he said carefully, measuring each word, "don't understand what service means or what it costs." Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears. "But they're talking about Mom like they knew her, like her dying was just some plot point in their stupid story." The article had indeed twisted Catherine's battle with cancer into a narrative about abandonment and guilt, suggesting Michael's PTSD stemmed not just from combat, but from being deployed while his wife faced her final months. A complete fabrication that ignored the reality how he'd received compassionate leave, how they'd faced her illness together until the very end. Michael's phone rang, interrupting the moment. Camilla Reynolds' name flashed on the screen. "Sophie, you should head to school. We'll talk more tonight." "But Dad, remember what we always say about storms?" He held her gaze steadily. Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then squared her shoulders. "Weather them with dignity. That's my girl." He hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you." "Love you too, Dad." After Sophie left, Michael answered Camilla's call, his voice calm despite the turmoil inside. "Michael, I'm so sorry." Camilla's voice carried a tight, controlled fury. "We're already investigating the source of the leak. The board is meeting in an hour." It was James Wilson. The certainty in Michael's voice left no room for doubt. Camilla's brief silence confirmed his suspicion. "Yes, it has traced the access of your personnel files to his computer. We're building a case now." Michael sat heavily at the kitchen table, his eyes landing on the framed photo of Catherine that had occupied the same spot since they'd moved in. Her smile, captured mid-laugh during a beach trip 3 months before her diagnosis, seemed to give him strength. "Camilla, I want to be clear about something. I won't resign. My PTSD doesn't define me, and neither does my grief. If anything, those experiences have made me more capable of handling crises, more attuned to protecting others. You've seen that firsthand. The board may see things differently, Michael. They're concerned about public perception liability. Then I'll make them see differently. I'm coming in." The whispers began the moment Michael stepped through the revolving doors into the Horizon Global lobby. Conversations halted abruptly. Eyes darted away when he looked up. Security team members who normally greeted him with easy camaraderie now studied their monitors with sudden fascination. At his desk, Michael found printouts of the article arranged neatly in the center, an anonymous gift. Without changing expression, he dropped them in the recycling bin and began reviewing the day's security reports as if nothing had happened. Twice during the morning, James Wilson walked slowly past Michael's open door, barely concealing his satisfied smirk. Each time, Michael continued working without acknowledgement. He wouldn't give James the satisfaction of a reaction. By mid-morning, the board meeting was underway. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Michael could see animated gestures and serious faces. Camilla stood at one end of the table, arms crossed defensively, clearly arguing against the tide of opinion. His phone vibrated with a text from Sophie. Dad, it's awful at school. Everyone's seen the article. Jenny's mom told her you shouldn't be allowed to work with normal people. I hate this. Michael's heart contracted painfully. Before he could respond, Eliza appeared in his doorway, her usually bright expression replaced with discomfort. Mr. Forrester, the board requests your presence immediately. He stood straightening his tie and adjusting his jacket habits from military life that now felt like donning armor. As he followed Eliza toward the conference room, he caught fragments of whispered conversations. Liability issue. PR nightmare. What if he snaps? The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 14 faces turned toward him, displaying a spectrum from pity to suspicion to barely disguised contempt. Camilla's expression was the lone exception, apologetic and angry on his behalf. Before anyone could speak, Michael's phone buzzed again. This time a text from Sophie's school counselor, Mr. Forrester. Sophie left class in tears after several students made inappropriate comments about your personal situation. She ran out of the building. Security is looking for her now. The world around Michael seemed to slow and recede. The boardroom, the executives, the corporate politics, all of it suddenly insignificant. His daughter needed him. Excuse me, he said quietly, already turning to leave. My daughter needs me. Harrison Wells, the board's vice chairman, rose halfway from his seat. Mr. Forrester, this meeting is mandatory. Michael paused at the door, his voice level, but carrying an authority that silenced the room. With all due respect, Mr. Wells, nothing is more mandatory than being there for my child. Judge me for my PTSD if you must. Question my ability to serve this company, but never question my priorities as a father. He strode through the office without registering the stares and whispers that followed him. In the main lobby, he heard running footsteps and turned to see Sophie bursting through the revolving doors, her face streaked with tears. She threw herself into his arms with such force that he took a step back to steady them both. They said terrible things, Dad, she sobbed against his chest. About you, about Mom, about everything. Michael held her close, aware of, but not caring about the employees pretending not to watch. For once, he didn't concern himself with appearing strong or in control. He simply became what his daughter needed most, her father solid and present, letting her cry it out. After several minutes, Sophie's breathing steadied. She pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her public display of emotion. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come here like this. You did exactly the right thing, Michael assured her, keeping an arm around her shoulders. Let's go home. As they turned to leave, Camilla appeared in the lobby, concern etched across her features. She approached cautiously, respecting their privacy with her distance. Michael, take whatever time you need. We'll continue this discussion when you're ready. He nodded his appreciation, then guided Sophie through the revolving doors into the bright morning, leaving behind the corporate world that now seemed both hostile and strangely irrelevant compared to the needs of his daughter. The emergency board meeting notice appeared in Michael's email just after 8 p.m. that evening. 9 o'clock the following morning, barely enough time to prepare. Sophie had finally fallen asleep on the couch, emotionally exhausted from the day's events. Michael covered her with a blanket before retreating to the kitchen to collect his thoughts. He had no illusions about what tomorrow would bring. The board wanted him gone, a potential liability erased. He'd faced similar judgments before, but this time felt different. This time the stakes extended beyond him to Sophie and to the veterans program he'd begun building at Horizon. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Forrester. Mr. Forrester, this is Marcus from security. I know it's late, but I thought you should know Ms. Reynolds is still in the building. Been in her office since the board meeting this morning. Michael checked his watch, almost 9 p.m. Thanks for letting me know, Marcus. After hanging up, Michael stared out the kitchen window at the city lights. Why would Camilla still be at work? The obvious answer, preparation for tomorrow's meeting, didn't entirely satisfy him. Something else was happening. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn asserting itself in earnest. Michael's footsteps echoed through the marble lobby of Horizon Global as he entered the building that had briefly represented a new beginning. Now every reflective surface seemed to mock him, showing fragmented reflections of a man fighting to maintain his dignity. The security guards avoided eye contact as he passed. The elevator ride to the top floor stretched interminably, filled with soft music and the shifting feet of other passengers who carefully maintained their distance. Michael stood perfectly still, center of gravity, balanced hands clasped behind his back the way he'd been taught in the service. When surrounded by uncertainty, maintain your bearing. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, heavy oak panels that likely cost more than 3 months of his rent. Inside, 14 board members turned to watch his entrance. Some wore masks of concern, others barely concealed satisfaction. Camilla sat at the head of the table, her normally commanding presence diminished by the tension visible in her shoulders and the shadows beneath her eyes. "Mr. Forrester," Harrison Wells said, gesturing to an empty chair, "please join us." Michael chose a seat halfway down the table, keeping his back straight and expression neutral. A stack of newspapers sat in the center of the polished surface. His life and pain splashed across the headlines in bold black ink. "I assume you've seen this morning's news," Wells continued, sliding one paper forward. "Disturbing allegations have come to light about your mental fitness for this position." Camilla's hand tightened around her pen. "These are private medical records that were illegally obtained, Harrison. The real security concern is how that information was accessed and leaked." "Which raises an additional point of concern," Martha Chen interjected, her steel gray hair perfectly styled. "If his personal information was so easily compromised, what does that say about our corporate data security?" Michael felt his jaw tighten. They were talking about him as if he weren't present, treating him as a problem to be solved, rather than a person sitting right in front of them. "My PTSD has been properly treated and documented," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It has never interfered with my ability to perform my duties either in the military or here at Horizon." "The issue isn't just the PTSD, Mr. Forrester," Wells leaned forward. "It's the pattern of instability, see, the violent incidents in your service record." "Those were combat situations," Camilla interrupted sharply. "He was doing his job, protecting people like us." Wells continued as if she hadn't spoken. "And the death of your wife. That kind of trauma." Michael's chair scraped back before he consciously decided to stand. The room fell silent. When he spoke, his voice remained steady, but it carried the weight of every battle he'd ever fought. "My wife died of cancer 6 years ago. I watched her fight with more courage than anyone in this room has ever shown. And then I raised our daughter alone while dealing with the scars of service that I earned protecting people who never had to see what I saw." He looked each board member in the eye. "If you want to question my qualifications, fine. But don't you dare use my wife's death or my sacrifice for this country as weapons against me." Camilla stood too, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Michael has proven himself repeatedly. Yesterday's security incident alone." "The board has made its decision," Wells announced flatly. "Mr. Forrester, you are suspended pending a full review of your employment. Please surrender your security credentials to HR on your way out." The words hit like physical blows, but Michael's military bearing held. He reached into his jacket, removed his security badge, and placed it carefully on the table. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. "Michael, wait!" Camilla called after him. He paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. "Thank you for trying, Ms. Reynolds, but we both know some battles can't be won." The walk through the office was a gauntlet of whispers and averted eyes. Employees who had cheered him just days ago now found their computer screens suddenly fascinating. His desk looked exactly as he'd left it, a photo of Sophie, his service medal, in its case, a half-drunk cup of coffee now gone cold. He packed quickly, efficiently, the way he'd learned to pack under fire. The cardboard box felt ridiculously light in his arms as he rode the elevator down, as if 2 decades of service could be reduced to so little. The drive home passed in a blur. He found himself sitting on his living room couch as evening shadows lengthened across the walls. His old dress uniform hung in its garment bag in the open closet metals, catching the last rays of sunlight. Michael unzipped the bag with trembling fingers, running his hand over the crisp fabric. The weight of those metals had once meant something. Now they felt like anchors pulling him down into deeper, darker waters. The front door opened and closed softly. Sophie's footsteps pattered across the carpet, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her, couldn't bear to see disappointment in her eyes. The couch dipped as she sat beside him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the shadows deepen across his folded uniform. Then Sophie's small hand covered his warm and steady. "The only easy day was yesterday," she whispered, quoting the SEAL motto he'd taught her years ago. The simple words spoken with such faith cracked something inside him. A single tear rolled down his cheek as his daughter's hand tightened around his, holding him together when everything else was falling apart. Morning light filtered through the worn curtains of the Forrester apartment, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Michael sat at the table, staring into his untouched coffee. His phone lay silent beside him. No calls from the office, no messages from colleagues who had shared laughs with him just days ago. The newspaper on the counter remained folded and unopened. He couldn't bear to see if there were news stories about him. Sophie appeared in the doorway dressed in her favorite blue sweater and jeans instead of her school uniform. Her backpack was nowhere in sight. "Dad," she said firmly, "we're going out for breakfast." Michael glanced up, surprised by her tone. "Honey, I don't think—" "No excuses." Sophie crossed her arms, looking so much like Catherine that it made his heart ache. "You always told me that foresters don't hide when things get tough." A weak smile tugged at his lips. "Did I say that?" "About 1,000,000 times." She walked over and tugged at his arm. "Come on, you haven't even changed out of yesterday's clothes." Michael looked down at his rumpled dress shirt, the one he'd worn to the board meeting. He hadn't bothered changing before falling into a restless sleep on the couch. "Give me 10 minutes, he conceded. In the shower, the hot water helped wash away some of the fog from his sleepless night. Sophie was right. Hiding at home wouldn't solve anything. He changed into jeans and a clean navy sweater, then ran a comb through his hair, more out of habit than vanity. They walked 3 blocks to Mary's Diner, a local spot they'd frequented since Sophie was small. The morning air was crisp with autumn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibilities. A few early joggers passed them, and Michael found himself automatically scanning for potential threats, old habits formed in war zones that never quite disappeared. The diner's bell chimed as they entered. Mary herself stood behind the counter, her gray hair tucked under a hairnet. "Michael, Sophie, haven't seen you two in a while." "Hi, Mary," Sophie replied cheerfully, leading her father to their usual booth by the window. They ordered their usual chocolate chip pancakes for Sophie, eggs, and hash browns for Michael. As Mary poured their coffee, hot chocolate for Sophie, Michael noticed his daughter studying him with an intensity that reminded him of mission briefings. "Okay, spill it," he said, stirring cream into his coffee. "What's on your mind?" Sophie wrapped her hands around her mug. "Remember last year when I wanted to quit the debate team?" Michael nodded. It had been a rough time. Sophie had frozen during her first competition, and the other kids had been merciless afterward. "You told me that running away would only make the fear bigger," she continued, her eyes fixed on his. "You said that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up again the next day." "That was different, sweetheart." "Was it?" Sophie leaned forward. "You taught me that we don't quit just because things get hard. You showed me that by example every single day after Mom died." Michael's throat tightened. Mary arrived with their food, but he barely noticed. "When you lost Mom," Sophie's voice softened, "you could have given up, but you didn't. You learned to braid my hair even though you were terrible at it at first." She smiled at the memory. "You came to every school event, helped with every project, even when I know you were exhausted from work. That's different. You're my daughter. And you're my dad." Sophie's eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "You've always been my hero, not because you were a SEAL, but because you never stopped trying. Those people at your company, they don't know you. They don't know how you volunteer at the Veterans Center or how you help Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs when her arthritis is acting up." Their food grew cold as Sophie continued. "Remember what you told me about your SEAL training about the bell?" Michael nodded slowly. "The bell that candidates could ring to quit during Hell Week. Its ring meant surrender, meant giving up on yourself and your team." "You didn't ring it then," Sophie said. "Don't ring it now." The simple wisdom of her words struck Michael with physical force. Here was his daughter who had lost her mother too young, who had dealt with his nightmares and grief, who had never complained about their tight budget or small apartment, telling him she was proud. "When did you get so smart?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I had a good teacher." Sophie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Those board members, they think they know what strength is because they make million-dollar deals. But real strength, that's getting up every day and doing what's right even when it's hard. That's what you taught me." Michael looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Somehow, while he'd been busy trying to protect her, she'd grown into someone who could protect him right back. Her faith in him was stronger than any medal he'd ever earned, more valuable than any corporate title. "The pancakes are getting cold," Sophie said with a gentle smile. Michael picked up his fork, feeling something shift inside him. The weight of yesterday's humiliation began to lift, replaced by a familiar determination, the kind that had carried him through training, through combat, through losing Catherine. "You know what?" he said, taking a bite of his now cold eggs. "You're right." "I know," Sophie grinned. "I'm always right. You should be used to it by now." Michael chuckled, the sound unfamiliar after so many days of tension. As they finished their breakfast, he realized that while he'd spent years being Sophie's anchor, somewhere along the way, she had become his. Camilla Reynolds sat at her mahogany desk long after midnight, staring at the framed magazine covers celebrating her success. Her fingers traced the edge of one featuring her triumphant smile beneath the headline, America's Most Powerful CEO. The glass felt cold beneath her touch, as cold as her heart had been that first day in the interview room with Michael Forrester. The building was nearly empty. Security would soon make their final rounds, but she wasn't ready to leave. The weight of her silence during the board's vote pressed heavily on her shoulders. Ms. Reynolds, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Security needs to do their final sweep. Will you be leaving soon? Camilla pressed the button. Not yet, Janet. I need more time. She stood and walked to the window, watching as the city lights flickered like stars below the same city where years ago she'd returned after her rescue, after Michael and his team had saved her life. She had buried those memories deep, convinced herself that success and power were the only shield she needed. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. The screen showed dozens of missed calls from board members, all probably warning her to stay away from the Michael Forrester situation. She ignored them all and dialed Janet's extension. Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. But Ms. Reynolds, several board members are traveling. Then they'll dial in remotely. Make it happen. Her voice carried the steel that had made her famous, and Janet marked it as mandatory attendance. After hanging up, Camilla sank into her chair and opened her laptop. The leaked article about Michael's PTSD and Catherine's death filled the screen. The words blurred as unexpected tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of shame. She remembered the terror of her captivity, the hopelessness that had nearly crushed her. Then came the sounds of combat and eventually a calm voice telling her she was safe. She'd never seen the faces of her rescuers clearly, but now she knew one of them had been Michael Forrester. Camilla pulled up the company's personnel files. Michael's military record was there, heavily redacted, but still impressive. Multiple commendations, leadership roles, successful missions. What caught her eye were the testimonials from his team members. Would follow him into hell itself, never left anyone behind, taught us that true strength comes from serving others. Her computer chimed with incoming emails, board members complaining about the short notice. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a blank document and began typing. Distinguished board members, I stand before you today, not just as your CEO, but as someone who has failed this company's core values. The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote about integrity, about judgment, clouded by pride, about a man who had saved her life, only to be mocked and dismissed years later because she'd forgotten what real courage looked like. Hours passed. Janet left a sandwich that went untouched. Camilla wrote and rewrote, pouring her heart onto the screen. When she finally finished, she walked to the full-length mirror in her private bathroom. The woman who stared back looked different from the polished CEO on those magazine covers. Her mascara was smudged, her designer blazer wrinkled, but her eyes held something new: humility and purpose. She smoothed her hair and began to practice her speech. I was wrong, she said to her reflection, voice shaking. We were all wrong about Michael Forrester. The words caught in her throat. She started again, stronger this time. This company claims to value integrity, courage, and leadership. Yet when a man who embodies all these qualities stood before us, we saw only what we wanted to see. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept going. I'm not asking you to give him his job back. I'm telling you that if he goes, I go too, because I cannot lead a company that rejects the very principles it claims to uphold. Camilla wiped her eyes, smearing expensive makeup across her sleeve. She didn't care. Tomorrow would change everything, her reputation, possibly her career. But for the first time in years, she felt truly worthy of her position. She practiced the speech again and again, each time with more conviction. The night grew deeper, but she stayed rehearsing words that might save more than just Michael's job. They might save the soul of her company and her own. Morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Horizon Global boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished table. Camilla stood at its head, her usual confident posture masking the nervous flutter in her stomach. Around her sat 12 board members, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Through the glass walls, she could see a growing crowd of employees gathering in the atrium below. Many held handmade signs supporting Michael Forrester. The sight strengthened her resolve. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Camilla began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I've called this emergency meeting to address our grievous error in suspending Michael Forrester. Arnold Matthews, a senior board member, leaned forward with a frown. Ms. Reynolds, we've been through this. The publicity risks? No. Camilla cut him off, something she'd never done before. The boardroom fell silent. Today you will listen to me not as your CEO, but as someone whose life was saved by the man we so casually dismissed. She took a deep breath and moved to the window, gesturing at the gathering below. Look at our people. They're not here because of corporate mandate or obligation. They're here because Michael Forrester showed them what true leadership looks like. Camilla turned back to face the board, her shoulders straight. Years ago, I was kidnapped overseas. I never told any of you the full story because I wanted to forget it happened. I wanted to pretend I was always this polished, successful woman you see before you. Her voice wavered slightly. I spent 3 days in darkness, certain I would die. When rescue came, I didn't see faces, just shadows moving with precision and purpose. One of those shadows was Michael Forrester. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Camilla continued, her voice growing stronger. And how did I repay him when he came seeking honest work? I mocked his service. I belittled his experience. I acted as if leading men in life or death situations was somehow less valuable than managing profit margins. She pulled out a folder and began distributing documents. These are reports from every department head since Michael joined us. Security incidents down 40%, employee morale up, crisis response time cut in half. He did this while enduring whispers, mockery, and prejudice. Martha Chen studied the reports with widening eyes. These numbers are impressive, but his personal history, Camilla's voice rose with controlled passion. You mean losing his wife, raising a daughter alone, wrestling with the psychological cost of protecting ungrateful people like me? Yes, let's talk about that history. She walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each member. Michael Forrester's PTSD isn't a liability. It's a testament to his humanity. He has seen the worst of humanity, yet chosen to believe in its best. While we've been trading stocks, he's been trading his life for others. Through the windows, the crowd in the atrium had grown larger. Someone had started a chant, "Bring Forrester back." Camilla pulled out one final document. This is my letter of resignation, effective immediately if you don't reinstate Michael Forrester, but not just as security director, as our new executive advisor on leadership and crisis management. Gasps echoed around the table. Arnold Matthews sputtered, "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Camilla stated firmly. "I've spent years building this company's wealth. Michael Forrester spent years building something far more valuable, character. It's time we acknowledge which one matters more." She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. "We have an opportunity here. We can continue being just another soulless corporation, or we can become something more. Michael Forrester isn't just a hire. He's a symbol of everything we should aspire to be." The boardroom fell silent except for the muffled chants from below. Camilla straightened up, smoothing her blazer. "I'll give you 10 minutes to decide. Either Michael Forrester returns with expanded responsibilities, or I walk, and I promise you half of our workforce will follow." She turned and walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "One more thing, the executive who leaked Michael's personal information is sitting at this table. I have proof. So when you vote, remember, I'm not the only one whose position is at stake today." Several board members paled, glancing nervously at each other. Camilla stepped out, closing the door behind her. She walked to the window overlooking the atrium, watching the gathered employees. Their signs, their chants, their unity, it all testified to Michael's impact. 10 minutes later, she returned to find the board members in hushed discussion. Arnold Matthews cleared his throat as she took her place at the head of the table. "We've taken a vote," he announced, his voice formal but subdued. Camilla held her breath, her hand instinctively touching the resignation letter in her pocket. Below, the chants grew louder. "Bring Forrester back! Bring Forrester back!" Martha Chen spoke up, a small smile playing at her lips. "The vote is unanimous. Michael Forrester is to be reinstated immediately as security director and appointed as executive advisor on leadership and crisis management with full benefits and back pay for his suspension period." Camilla's shoulders relaxed slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "And the board member responsible for the leak has resigned effective immediately," Arnold replied, sliding a letter across the table. Camilla nodded, then pressed the intercom button on the conference phone. "Please ask Michael Forrester to join us in the boardroom." The crowd in the atrium erupted in cheers as Michael's figure appeared, making his way through the gathered employees. Camilla watched him approach, remembering that dark night years ago when he had led her to safety. Now in his own mic, he was leading them all towards something better, a company with not just profits, but principles. 1 month later, the company auditorium buzzed with anticipation as employees filled every seat. Afternoon light filtered through high windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Sophie sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching as Camilla approached the podium. Today, Camilla began, her voice carrying through the space. I have the honor of introducing someone who has taught us all a valuable lesson about character. She paused, looking directly at Michael, who sat quietly off to the side. Mr. Michael Forrester. Michael rose slowly from his chair, straightening his navy suit jacket. As he walked to the podium, his footsteps echoed in the now silent hall. He hadn't prepared anything fancy. That wasn't his style. Years of military briefings had taught him that truth needed no embellishment. Standing at the podium, Michael's steady gaze swept across the sea of faces. He saw the security guards he'd trained, the office workers he'd protected, and even the executives who had once doubted him. His eyes finally settled on Sophie, who gave him an encouraging smile. When I first walked through the doors of Horizon Global, Michael began, his deep voice calm and measured. I carried my military service like a weight. I thought it was something I needed to hide or apologize for. He paused, letting his words sink in. I was wrong. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by his quiet intensity. Even those who had been checking their phones now looked up captivated. You see, service isn't just about wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. It's about putting others before yourself. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. These aren't just military values, they're human values. In the front row, Sophie watched her father transform. Gone was the uncertain man who had doubted himself at their kitchen table. In his place stood someone who finally understood his own worth. Life has taught me about sacrifice. Michael continued, his voice softening as he thought of Catherine. It's taught me about loss, but most importantly, it's taught me about resilience. He squared his shoulders. Every morning in SEAL training, we faced challenges that seemed impossible. But we persevered because we had each other, because we knew that strength isn't individual, it's collective. Several employees wiped their eyes, touched by the raw honesty in his words. Even Camilla, standing to the side, dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. When I was suspended, Michael acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room, I almost gave up. I almost believed those who said I didn't belong here. His eyes found Sophie again. But my daughter reminded me of something important. Our past doesn't define us. Our response to challenges does. Sophie's eyes welled with tears of pride as her father continued. Second chances aren't about pity. Michael's voice grew stronger. They're about recognition that everyone has value. That experience comes in many forms. That character matters more than credentials. He gripped the sides of the podium, leaning forward slightly. In the military, we learned that diversity of experience makes a team stronger. Different perspectives save lives. The same is true in business. When we judge people solely by traditional metrics, we miss out on incredible talent and wisdom. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by occasional sniffles from the moved audience. I stand here today not as a former SEAL trying to prove himself, but as a man who understands that every experience, every struggle, every victory, every setback has value. Michael's voice carried to the farthest corners of the room. I'm grateful to Ms. Reynolds and this company for seeing that value, for giving me the chance to show that leadership isn't about where you came from, but about where you're willing to go and who you're willing to help along the way. He straightened up, his voice firm with conviction. To everyone here who has ever felt out of place, who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever doubted their own worth, remember this. Your experiences matter. Your perspective matters. You matter. Michael's eyes swept the room one final time. Thank you for teaching me that second chances aren't just about starting over. They're about growing stronger. And thank you for showing me that sometimes the greatest act of service is simply believing in yourself and others. As Michael stepped back from the podium, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes. Through the standing ovation, Sophie remained seated for a moment, her heart swelling with pride. She looked up at her father, her hero, and whispered, "That's my dad." After the speech, Michael found himself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations and thanks. Among them was James Wilson's replacement, a former Marine who had been the first hire in Michael's veterans program. It had been a controversial decision, but Michael had insisted, who better to understand security than someone who had lived it. Later that afternoon, when the crowds had dispersed, Michael found himself alone with Camilla in the now empty auditorium. She sat in the front row, her usual commanding presence softened by the day's emotions. "That was quite a speech," she said quietly. "Thank you, ma'am." "Please," she held up her hand. "Just Camilla." She took a deep breath, and Michael could see her struggling to find the right words. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me get it all out." Michael nodded, standing at ease, a habit that now brought comfort rather than tension. "When you first sat in my office," Camilla began, "I saw what I wanted to see, a man who didn't fit my narrow view of success. I looked at your service like it was somehow less valuable than an MBA. She paused. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong." She gestured for him to sit beside her. Michael did, giving her space to continue. "You know, I buried those memories of the kidnapping so deep." She continued, staring straight ahead. "The fear, the helplessness, I couldn't bear to feel that vulnerable. Instead, I built walls. I became the person who could never be hurt again." She turned to face him. "And then you walked into my office, and those walls started crumbling." "I'm not speaking as your CEO right now," Camilla said, her eyes glistening. "I'm speaking as the woman who once sat in a dark room, certain she would die, until a team of brave men risked everything to save her. I'm speaking as the same woman who years later mocked one of those men because she was too proud, too scared to remember." She wiped at her eyes, leaving slight smudges of mascara. "I don't just owe you an apology for how I treated you in that interview. I owe you an apology for every day since then that I didn't acknowledge the debt I could never repay." "Camilla, you don't owe me anything." "But I do," she insisted. "I owe you my life. And more than that, I owe you the dignity of acknowledging who you are, who you've always been, a leader, a protector, a man of honor." She took another shaky breath. "Can you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air between them. Michael thought about Sophie waiting outside, about the lessons in forgiveness he'd tried to teach her since losing Catherine. He thought about his own struggles with pride and judgment. "You know," he said slowly, "in the SEALs we learned that carrying extra weight only slows you down. Grudges, regret, bitterness, they're all just dead weight." He stood and offered his hand to Camilla. "Forgiveness was given long ago. The question is, can you forgive yourself?" Camilla stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then took it firmly. As she rose, her shoulders straightened, but her eyes remained soft. "Thank you, Michael, for everything then and now." Outside, Sophie was waiting, leaning against a wall with her backpack at her feet, reading a book. When she saw her father, she smiled and tucked the book away. "Ready for our lunch date?" Michael asked, his heart full at the sight of her. "Always." "How's the veterans program going?" "Growing stronger every day. The board just approved funding for 50 positions by next quarter." They walked through the main lobby, past the security desk where Michael had first faced doubt and derision. Now the guards offered respectful nods as they passed. They continued past the break room that had once echoed with mockery, now filled with animated discussions between veterans and civilian staff. "You know what Sarah from school told me?" Sophie asked as they waited for the elevator. "She said her mom applied for the veteran program. She served in the Army, but has been struggling to find work since she got out. Sarah said you gave her mom hope." Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion as the elevator doors opened. They stepped inside, and through the glass walls, they could see the city sprawled below, bathed in autumn sunlight. "Dad," Sophie's voice was soft. "Remember when you used to say you didn't know where we belonged? After Mom died and you left the service." Michael nodded, memories of those uncertain days washing over him. "Look around," Sophie said, gesturing to the building that had become more than just a workplace. "Look at all the lives you're changing. Look how far we've come." As they reached the lobby and headed for the revolving doors, Sophie's hand found his just as it had during their darkest days. The autumn sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as they stepped outside. "We're finally home, Dad," she said softly. Michael smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep in his soul. The peace he'd been searching for had found him not in letting go of his past, but in using it to build a better future. In his daughter's eyes, he saw all the hope and purpose he'd ever need.